With the first Spanish ships to reach the New World came a black man. It was Pedro Alonso Nino, one of Christopher Columbus's pilots.
Blacks were common in Spain and Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries. Some entered Spain earlier during the centuries of Muslim rule there. Some crossed the Mediterranean from Africa as seamen. Others were brought across as slaves.
In 1513, 21 years after Columbus's first crossing, 30 blacks helped Balboa chop through Central American jungles to discover the Pacific Ocean. That same year, black men accompanied Ponce de Leon through Florida while he was searching for the Fountain of Youth.
Others helped explore Guatemala and conquer Chile, Peru, Venezuela, and Mexico. They accompanied men like Cortez, Narvaez, Cabaza de Vaca, Coronado, and De Soto.
Black men came with Menendez in 1565 when he founded the city of St. Augustine in Florida. One of the most remarkable black explorers was known as Esteban. The black-bearded Esteban was part of an expedition of 600 men on 5 ships that sailed from Spain in 1527. After the grueling voyage across the Atlantic, dozens of deserters abandoned ship when it stopped on the island of Santo Domingo.
As the ships sailed up the Florida coast, a storm came up, and the ships were battered to driftwood against the reefs. Only 4 men managed to swim ashore. 3 Spaniards and Esteban walked from Florida through what is now Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and New Mexico down into Mexico. He was the first foreigner to visit many of these areas. In 1535, he reached Mexico City, where the Spanish viceroy ruled.
Esteban lived quietly in Mexico City until 1539. And then Fray Marcos de Niza invited him to join a party seeking the legendary 7 cities of Cibola, cities of gold houses and jeweled streets. Because Esteban knew the land, the people, and their languages better than any man, Fray Marcos sent him on ahead with a group of Indian guides.
Estebanico, send me a message by Indian runner telling me what you have discovered during the day. If you find nothing, send me a small cross no larger than a man's hand made of twigs. If you discover something, send a larger cross. And if you find the 7 cities, send me a very large cross.
Esteban set out across the desert and soon vanished in the haze. For days, the Indian runners brought back only tiny crosses. And then, one morning...
Fray Marcos, look what comes! 3 Indians carrying a cross as large as a man. Esteban has found the cities.
The Indians told Fray Marcos that Esteban had found houses, a whole city of houses, some as high as 4 stories. They weren't gold, but above many doorways was embedded turquoise and other stones. Marcos set out to catch up with Esteban, only to meet 3 more Indians from his party, frightened and exhausted.
Where is Estebanico?
He is dead. Everyone is dead. The black man went into the city and was captured. He was killed with arrows when he tried to escape. Only we escaped.
What had Esteban discovered? He had come into the land of the Zunis, in what is now the southeastern part of Arizona. Esteban, a black man, was the first man from the Old World to reach Arizona.
Esteban and Pedro Alonso Nino have long been considered the earliest blacks to reach the New World. Today, however, some historians believe that Africans were here before 1492, before Columbus. Who they were and how they got here is uncertain, but researchers are continuing to look for clues. The first white man to come to Chicago was black. He was Jean-Baptiste Pont de Sable, born in Haiti about 1745. The son of a Frenchman and a former slave, DuSable was taken to France for his education and came to New Orleans in 1765.
At that time, New Orleans was a city where blacks were suspected to be runaway slaves. DuSable took refuge with a group of Jesuit monks until he decided to travel inland to trade with the Indians. He and two companions paddled their way up the Mississippi, eventually reaching St. Louis.
For a time, DuSable lived with the Illinois Indians. When he was 25, he married a Potawatomi Indian girl, and he settled near Fort Peoria.
But young DuSable did not stay settled. He traveled through the wilderness, trapping. Eventually, he reached Lake Michigan. He found the narrow stretch of land where travelers carried their small boats between the Illinois River and Lake Michigan on their way to and from Canada.
The Indians called the area Chicago, or simply Chicago. In 1772, DuSable built a trading post in a 5-room house. This was the beginning of the first settlement in what is now the city of Chicago.
British redcoats had arrived in Boston in 1765, sent by the Crown. The British expected the colonies to help share the expense of maintaining the troops. And as year followed year, resentment grew. Arguments and fights between townspeople and soldiers became common.
On the night of March 5th, 1770, the fire bell on the Boston Meeting House rang out. Crowds formed, and the redcoats tried to disperse them with bayonets and rifle butts. The crowds threw stones, sticks, and chunks of ice. On King Street, a group of British privates met a crowd that was led by a tall black man, Crispus Attucks.
Attucks had been a slave. He ran away from his master 20 years earlier and worked as a seaman. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, a commanding figure. On seeing the British troops, Attucks shouted,
"Do not be afraid! They dare not fight!"
As the angry crowd surged forward, Private Hugh Montgomery raised his musket and
Crispus Attucks fell dead, a martyr for American independence. The crowd turned and ran, but not before 5 men lay dying in the street. The tragedy was called the Boston Massacre. It moved the American colonies and the British Empire closer to war.
The tradition of black support for the United States is rich and deep. Black fighters stood at Lexington and at Concord Bridge. Lemuel Haynes was there. Samuel Kraft was there. Peter Salem, Pomp Blackman, Joe Putima, and Isaiah Bajona.
Lemuel Haynes fought at Ticonderoga, so did Primus Black and Ephraim Blackman.
Prince Hall fought at Bunker Hill with Pomp Fisk and Cuff Hayes and Caesar Dickerson and Caesar Weatherby and Salem Poor and Peter Salem.
Peter Salem was a hero that day, June 17th, 1775.
2,000 British infantry were ordered to smash the American militia around Boston. All morning, the ships bombarded the fortifications, and around 1 o'clock, the infantry landed and attacked. The colonials beat the redcoats back once, twice, but by the third assault, the Americans were almost out of powder. As the British stormed the hill, Major John Pitcairn urged his men on.
Pitcairn fell, shot by Peter Salem. The British line wavered and fell back as the men took their commander's body to the shore. The battle was over. George Washington took command of the American forces in July, after the Battle of Bunker Hill. Shortly after, he barred black enlistments in the Continental Army. But as the war dragged on, he needed more and more men.
After Valley Forge, every able-bodied man, black or white, slave or free, was welcome in the Army. black slaves now joined and fought and sometimes died. Prince Whipple and Oliver Cromwell crossed the Delaware with Washington. Jordan Freeman killed a British commander in defense of Fort Griswold in Connecticut. Captain Mark Starlin, the only black naval captain in Virginia's history, made night raids on British ships in Hampton Roads.
Starlin returned home, a hero, after the war. But he fell victim to the slavery he had left to fight for his country. His old master reclaimed him, and Mark Starlin died a slave.
Black men often were used as spies during the Revolutionary War. Two of the most famous were Pompey and James Armistead. Pompey was a hero of Stony Point, a strategic fort on the Hudson River. Washington had ordered General Anthony Wayne to retake the fort.
Pompey, the slave of a patriotic farmer, was allowed into the fort to sell strawberries and cherries. Once a soldier asked,
"Why do you come only at night?" "It's the corn hoeing season. I can't come during the day."
"Then you might get yourself shot, mate. You should know the password,
The password?
so you can pass the sentry. When he says, 'Who goes?' you say, 'Going, Mill.' He'll let you through."
That was the mistake Pompey was waiting for. On the night of July 15th, 1779, General Wayne's men moved into place. Pompey and two other men disguised as farmers went ahead of the column.
Up! Who goes?
A corn mill.
Oh, it's you, Pompey. Come ahead. Who's with you?
Friends, they bring the cherries.
Let me have some. I like...
With the sentry out of the way, Wayne's men were able to move up to the fort and take it quickly. With the help of men like Pompey, the Revolutionary War ended on September 3rd, 1783. 5,000 black Americans had fought alongside the white colonists on both land and sea. Hundreds of slave soldiers walked out of the army and into freedom.
but the spirit of the revolution dwindled. Thousands of black slaves wondered how soon they would share the freedom won from the British. They feared that the war had been fought for white men's freedom. Slavery grew stronger. Discrimination planted deep roots, and black Americans suffered.
God sure gonna make this trouble good. Stand still, Jordan, Jordan. Stand still, Jordan.
In 1812, war again broke out between the United States and Great Britain.
Black soldiers fought for Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. In September 1814, less than 4 months before that famous battle, Jackson issued a proclamation asking for the support of free blacks in Louisiana.
To every noble-hearted, generous freeman of color volunteering to serve during the present contest with Great Britain, and no longer, there will be paid the same bounty in money and lands now received by the white soldiers of the United States.
400 blacks enlisted in Jackson's army. They joined the Navy, too. One estimate says that in the War of 1812, between 10 and 20% of the Navy was black. Captain Oliver H. Perry had high praise for black sailors.
In the thick of the battle, many of my black crew set good examples for the white seamen to follow. They seemed absolutely insensible to danger.
Nathaniel Shaler, commander of the ship Governor Tompkins, told his own stories of black courage.
My vessel endured a heavy siege by the enemy, and my black crew never once faltered in their duties. The name of John Johnson, one of my black seamen, should be registered in the Book of Fame. He lay mortally wounded by a 24-pound shot, crying out words of encouragement to his fellow crewmen. And John Davis, another Negro done in by a similar fashion, begged me to throw him overboard so that he'd be out of the way of the others.
The war ended in 1814. The British withdrew. New land was available in the West, but it took courage to venture into the new untamed territories.
Westward rolled the wagons. Westward went the pioneers, black and white. In the winter of 1843, George Bush, a black man, set out with his family and 7 white families over the old Oregon Trail to the Columbia River Valley.
Bush took along $2,000 in raw silver. With it, he bought the first saw and grist mill on Puget Sound on the west coast, where his party finally settled after living over a year on the trail. They were the first Americans to settle on the Sound.
Lefty Beckworth, born in Missouri, the son of a white father and a black mother. When he was 27, he joined a fur trading expedition heading west. He shod horses, fought Indians, trapped beavers, skinned furs, hunted game for food.
In California, in the rugged mountains south of Mount Shasta, he discovered a pass that bears his name to this day.
Black explorers, frontiersmen, pioneers, revolutionists, Esteban, Bush, DuSable, Beckworth, Attucks, Peter Salem, and many others. They shared the American experience, from defending liberty to opening the frontier. They believed in the Declaration of Independence and hoped that its white promises would someday prove a reality for all men.
One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing. One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing. Mind out, my brother, how you walk on the cross. I heard the angels singing. Your foot might slip, your soul be lost. I heard the angels singing. One morning soon, my Lord, one morning soon, I heard the angels singing.